In the final years of World War II, Germany pulled out all the stops to try to change their fortunes and turn the tide of the conflict that was rapidly proving to be their undoing. Among their many attempted creations of a wonder weapon, or Wunderwaffe, was a new heavy tank that was first officially deployed in July of 1944. To the Germans, they would know it as the Panzerkampfwagen Tiger Ausf, or sometimes just the Tiger II or Tiger B. Their own troops would nickname it the Königstiger, which is German for Bengal Tiger, and to the Allies, they would come to know it as the King Tiger or Royal Tiger. They were huge, heavy, lethal, and nearly invincible when attacking head-on. And yet, it did nothing to change Germany's fortunes in the end, and in fact, arguably made their situation worse. Why is that? Initial development for the Tiger IIs dates back to 1937. The initial design contract was actually awarded to Henschel. They desperately wanted a tank that could carry an 8.8 centimeter gun, and they would wind up with the Tiger Is, which were impressive in their own way, but the Tiger Is were kind of a rushed job. They'd put together a lot of other design features from a bunch of different projects in order to make them, and they weren't perfect. The Tiger IIs were meant to be a successor, a much more refined design that would be able to handle not only the immediate problems that Germany was facing in the war, but also future ones that the enemy could develop. Some of the advantages given to the Tiger II when compared to the Tiger Is was a sloped armor design, similar to the Panther tanks. Armor sloping is a design feature that makes it a lot more difficult to penetrate armor, but it combined that with the thickness of the Tiger I's armor, making it just that much more effective. As heavy tanks, they were also going to be, well, huge, and they were indeed the largest and heaviest operational tank that was fielded by the German army in World War II. They weren't the largest ones they had built, as the Maus was even bigger, but the Tiger IIs actually entered production and were utilized on the battlefield. Naturally, developing this type of thing was not a smooth process. The turret they wound up using was developed by Krupp, and sometimes it's erroneously called a Henschel turret, but Henschel did not actually design the turret. They just used it for their tank. Now, Henschel had to scramble to get this together because, well, they needed this tank, and it had to be available as soon as possible. So, in a way, even though the Tiger II was meant to be a more refined Tiger I and therefore not rushed, the Tiger IIs were, well, rushed. To a degree, anyway. Some advancements and improvements over the Tiger I were still added. For example, the Tiger I had a really complex triple interleaved suspension system. And while it was interesting, it also meant that making repairs was very time-consuming. And in the battlefield, that's bad. So the Tiger IIs tried to simplify it a little bit by making it so that they had the same pattern, but not actually interleaved. Though due to the tank's overall weight, it still meant that doing field repairs was nearly impossible, but at least they tried. They had a crew of 5, and they added a bunch of optics to it, having a magnification binocular gun sight for the main gun, as well as a sighting telescope for the hull machine gun. The driver actually was given a rotating periscope that could turn and see in any direction. Another big push with the Tiger II's design was actually standardization, to a degree, as they wanted it to be compatible with the Panther IIs, to make maintenance in the field a lot easier. So the Tiger II would wind up using the Maybach HL230 TRM P30 engine. It was a 12-cylinder 23-liter engine, running on gasoline, that could deliver 600 horsepower at 2,600 RPM, though it was governed at 2,500 RPM. Some later models would replace it with the HL230 P45, which provided 700 horsepower. But in either case, the drive system was actually like the worst part of the Tiger IIs. The Tiger Is had similar issues with their drives, as did the Panther, and those issues were only partially rectified with new drive housings. The real issue at the end of the day was overstressing these drive systems that hadn't been designed to move such heavy vehicles. Again, the original engine was 600 horsepower, but the Tiger IIs were over 68 tons. And it was quickly discovered that the engine could not supply enough power to make them go at a decent rate of speed. Their own manuals listed their top speed at about 41.5 kilometers per hour. That's a little less than 26 miles per hour. But that was based off of the manufacturer's own testing on level ground. In the field, it was much less, especially when the ground was soft, sometimes not even breaking 10 miles per hour. And naturally, there were many production issues. Germany's industrial infrastructure had taken significant hits over the course of the war due to Allied bombings. And due to their size, Tiger IIs were expensive and required time to put together. And time really wasn't what they had. They didn't produce nearly as many as they thought they would. And by the end of the war, Henschel only managed to push out 492. And you probably noticed by this point in the discussion that I'm being astonishingly negative. Does that mean that they got out there and did absolutely nothing for Germany? Well, in the grand scheme of things, yes, they did nothing for Germany. But it's worth mentioning that when they did function, and their drive systems were working appropriately, and they were put in a situation where they could actually do what they were supposed to do, they were absolutely horrifying. The best trait of the Tiger IIs was not only the intimidation factor here, but also that front armor. I was not kidding earlier when I said that head-on these things were practically invincible. I'm being quite serious about this. For one thing, that gun was incredibly strong. It was capable of knocking out pretty much any Allied tank from the front at ranges that exceeded 2.5 kilometers, which was actually well beyond the effective range of Allied tanks. And the armor, oh goodness! At its thickest, it was 185 millimeters. And the Allies did do tests to see how well their weapons were able to penetrate it. The British found out that at a certain angle of like 90 degrees, it'll penetrate the front armor a lot better, particularly using the QF 17-pounder gun. Of course, that never actually worked in battle at any point during the war. And the Soviets found out that hitting certain parts of the front of it where the welding was weaker due to rushed production, that they could in fact penetrate those joints at ranges of 500 to 600 meters after 3 to 4 shots. Which, again, in the middle of battle, what? 3 to 4 shots? No! What? No! Any Allied soldier that faced a functional Tiger II was deeply alarmed, and understandably so. If there's one thing the Tiger IIs managed to do right, it was becoming scary as all heck for the troops that had to face them. They were massive, intimidating, powerful, and nearly invincible from the front. But I do keep saying from the front. And yes, much like a lot of other tanks actually, the armor on the sides, and in particular the back, was a lot thinner. So generally the strategy to deal with them was flanking maneuvers. And the Allied tanks were a lot faster and more maneuverable. The Shermans may have had smaller guns and less armor, but not only were there more of them, but they had the option of tactical retreat and redeployment. So as frightening as the Tiger IIs were, they could be dealt with, and Allied troops swiftly learned this. Though in situations where the Tiger IIs were in spots that they couldn't outmaneuver, they had to get creative. There's even stories of some Allied troops setting charges and dropping buildings on Tiger IIs to stop the blasted things. Because at the end of the day, in some aspects, they did embody the German war machine pretty well. Flawed and rushed, but definitely scary. But at the end of the day, they did nothing to change things. There weren't enough of them, for one, and once the Allies figured out how to deal with them, well, they could deal with them. The other problem was that, well, frankly, at that point in the war, Germany didn't necessarily need a heavy tank, if you ask a lot of war historians. They needed more tanks, not a few massive ones. And yes, the Tiger IIs were powerful, but they couldn't produce them very quickly, and again, they were extremely expensive. The German supply chain was heavily disrupted, making it so that manufacturing something like this was nearly impossible. It would be expensive in a perfect situation, let alone one that Germany was facing. A whole bunch of smaller, cheaper tanks may have done them a few more favors, or at least not wasted their supplies. Though, honestly, by the time mid-1944 rolled around, there really wasn't much Germany was going to be able to do to turn the tide of things. The real wonder weapon of the war would be made over in America and used on Japan. The Tiger IIs definitely impressed and intimidated, but they didn't change anything. Still, they are a popular piece of war history, and the Allies would capture a few and use some of their more beneficial design features for their own tank development as time went on. It wasn't like they didn't have an impact. Oh, they did. They just didn't change Germany's fortunes, as they weren't the answer they were looking for. But at the end of the day, several did survive the war and can be seen in museums mostly in Europe, and there's one in America, Fort Benning, Georgia. But the most famous example is actually in France, as that one is the only running example of a Tiger II. So while the Tiger IIs didn't change anything in the grand scheme of things, I think we can all agree that, at the very least, they were big chungus. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Sundude267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzerkampfwagen 131-232, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Royal Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Lord Hawk 444, That Guy with the Beard, Mark Holding, Murder Drone Stall, A-Person723, DM Tribal Typhoon, Alfonso Lapuche, Royal Hudson 2860, Isofer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matthew Wolf, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Matt Weaver, Alaric Jaspers, Tom Red Lion, NS Productions 8104, Hannah Bird, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, Dr. Race 78, The Baxter, and Caleb Crosswhite. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.